of the top.
All right. So the first piece that we wanted to dive into is what Pieter called the radius of concern. And as men, there's a tendency with fear to kind of go one of two directions, to either shut down and really focus on what are my needs, what am I hoarding in order to protect myself from what I'm afraid of, and or out from there to really look at it in terms of, okay, my family, my immediate people that I'm responsible for in the world. And this is a place that we can actually work together in community like this to increase this radius of concern. Basically, when we are in fear, to be able to reach further out and actually consider a wider radius of people and other beings, rather than solely focusing on getting out of the situation or tending to our own needs. So the question that we came up with is, how can I use my fear as a prompt to become concerned with others' experience? The story that I like to tell with this is my graduate school interview. When I showed up, I was totally nervous, sweating out my shirt. It meant a lot to me. And the woman interviewing me sat down and she looked at me and the two other people in the interview and she said, "Man, I'm fucking anxious. How are you guys?" And right then my own fear dissolved, because she had used her own fear, her own awareness of her anxiety, to free me and the other people in the room from being so focused on our own fear. So that's what we're talking about here with how can you use your awareness of however you feel fear in order to liberate the people that you come into contact with. So reveal your experience as a gift to others. So
Nice.
Pieter, physiology.
Yeah. So this is really, I guess this is a recognition of the biology of what is happening when we become scared, right? When we become, when fear takes over, we're kind of built as, animals that are really wired to react with this chemical cortisol and adrenaline, when the energy mobilizes to our extremities, away from our organs, and we are in a position to either fight or flee. The problem is that absent a kind of external threat, what happens to our physiology when we don't have that threat to move against? And so there's two things that we say about that. One is recognizing that if we don't have a mechanism to then move those chemicals and that sort of physiology through, it's almost like a trauma cycle, then it kind of can continue to stay active and wear on our actual physical health. And so one of the sort of mantras that I really like is, here is energy that wants to move. And sorry, I'm just trying to mute Rashid there because he's so here is information that wants to move, meaning like when we are scared, we actually it would help to actually move the energy through our breath work, through some sort of movement like dance or through running, things like that. And that can actually take us through this kind of fear catharsis train into a kind of like relaxation. And so breath and movement really as keys to giving ourselves the physiological completion that we often don't have, because we don't even remember that there's a physiology that we are responsible for mastering given this modern context. Yeah, off to you, Andrew.
So the third one we had is what we call a question loop. So this is really questioning your fear. because there's a certain insistence that happens with fear, that it really demands our attention, and it seems like there's no room to it sometimes, that it is what it is. I'm afraid of this. I'm afraid that, I'm not going to be able to get out of my house for weeks. It's important to look at it and say, okay, so what's bad about that? And what doing this does is brings us in touch with our purpose, because in this day and age, we're not actually faced with death in as many ways as we would have been, even 100 years ago. And so what we fear for becomes really divorced from, kind of the primordial fear, which is that, I'm going to die, or the people closest to me are going to die. And yet we have the same level of reaction to these other things, like I'm going to lose my freedom, or I'm not going to be able to pay for the things that I need. And so we have to ask ourselves this question, what's bad about that, to get back in touch with what's actually most important to us. Because that's the quality that fear has, is to be able to actually point us in the direction of what really matters, and be able to show up for it. So we just had a few things down here on the bottom of the page: death, failure, money, the ability to provide, that guys shared with us on the last call. Fear of feeling weak, fear of not being able to show up for our purpose. And so this call is really an opportunity to take a risk and go a level deeper. So if you've been hanging out at one level with what you're afraid of, or what your anxiety sort of organizes around, try out in this call what's beneath that. What's more important to you than the things that you typically look toward in this scenario? Kick it back to you, Pieter.
Yeah, so this next one is really, to me, is I'm thinking about, again, back about the body, in the sense that, so like, how does fear immobilize us and bring us into a sense of being on our heels rather than being sort of an active participant in the world? And so, like, a question to ask ourselves is like, is this situation, is this narrative, is this this chaotic situation, is this happening to me, or am I sort of occurring or doing to the world? And we notice that fear is obviously, the go-to sort of like club, the bludgeon used by the sort of like mega powers of government and institutions to immobilize and herd humans. And so, like, as men, in a way, we have one of the we're sort of the chess pieces of that thing, because when men are scared, men lock down, men stay, their radius of concern shrinks, and they are ready to fight or flee. But with the opening of this sense of, in the body, where's my agency, where is my sense of sort of what I'm doing, how I'm trying to occur. How am I even just occurring? Not that I necessarily have to be doing something, but am I occurring as fluid? Am I open? And one thing I just want to highlight is this idea of money as this kind of currency of fear. It's like, the more that we freak out about our ability to generate or have or hoard materiality, and in particular our bank account, the more we have located our agency outside of our own physical body, our own sort of psycho-spiritual reference point. And so coming back into the body, coming back into a sense of where's my agency, and noticing money as a kind of diagnostic for our own self-governance, self-sovereignty. Kick it to you.
So the last one we have here is what I called fear bonding. And you've probably seen it a lot going on social media, or even just, out in the world, if you're still able to get out in the world at all. This phenomenon of rules of belonging based on fear. So people tend to sort of self-organize into what they agree to be afraid of. And right now, some of the big things are, there's a lot of people afraid of actually getting infected. And yet there are other people who really aren't afraid of getting infected, but they're more afraid of losing their rights, losing their freedom, losing their mobility. And you can see where people sort of separate out into these silos. And a lot of times we're not even aware when that's happening, but we sort of get a sense of, okay, here's where my fear is located. And someone comes up to us and shares, what's going on in their world. And we put them into a category, either, okay, this person is like me and they're afraid of more or less the same things that I am, and we can kind of band together and organize around that. Or this person isn't afraid of the things that I'm afraid of, they're afraid of something else, and we put them in another category. And especially on social media, this tends to get really it's like gasoline on the fire, and people get really polarized. So what can happen once we start realizing this, that we've organized around, okay, the people in my life are the people who sort of share the fears that are my go-to fears. When we realize that and we decide to start questioning that sense of belonging, saying, oh, I don't actually want to belong according to what I'm afraid of. I want to belong according to what I'm creating, what I'm serving, what I'm choosing in my life. There's something that happens where this fear of losing connection comes in, because as soon as you tell the people that you've been associated with based on some shared fear, hey, this isn't the game I'm playing anymore, you don't know what they're going to do. They may say, hey, you're nuts, or you're irresponsible, really call you into question. And as men, as leaders in our families and communities and companies, it's this second one that's so tricky to put our finger on sometimes, because this is a time to speak out, and it's a time to be humble and actually share what it is that we want to create in our lives and in the lives of people around us. But there is a risk that people that have associated with us based on their understanding of what we're afraid of, they might not like it. They might call you out. And this is a space to really try out a different way of relating, where it's based on mutual creation rather than agreeing to be afraid of the same things, and bonding based on that. So if someone shares something different than kind of your native state on this call, really try out accepting them and listening to it from that deep place of, you can connect with someone from a place where you have space for whatever they are afraid of.
Sweet.
Anything you wanted to add to close this out, Peter?
No, I think that feels good. It'll feel good to yeah, that feels like a complete view of the ways that fear can occur, at least for right now.
I'm going to stop the recording.